I want to welcome you guys to the show. I'm your host, Jody Taves, and I'm the owner of Explora Creative. And today we are talking with Meg and Nina of Articulate Design and Consulting. So I'm very excited about this. We're going to be talking about clinic design today. So, Meg, I believe you're going to introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about Articulate and both of your backgrounds.
Sure. So Nina and I have both been practicing physiotherapists, physical therapists for our American friends, for a long time. Let's put it that way. And we are both very passionate about what we do as clinicians, but for some time now, we had this shared distaste in the way that healthcare places and spaces were designed, both from a functionality standpoint and aesthetic standpoint. They were really kind of uninspiring places for the most part. And both of us have quite a bit of design experience in our personal lives. And really, it came from a shared sort of communication around this idea that we could do better in our field of creating places that are welcoming and inspiring for the client, but maybe even more importantly for the clinicians that work there and spend so many hours there. And so that really birthed the idea of Articulate. And in all honesty, I think when you put something out into the universe, it rewards you. Someone actually approached us while we were kind of in the background talking and fleshing out this idea and said, "Hey, I know you don't do clinic design, but would you design a clinic?" And we were like, "Well, actually, we are, looking into going with this." So we did that clinic, thinking, okay, maybe we'll do a few of these a year, and there'll be some interest. And lo and behold, here we sit, pretty much 4 years later to the date, and have a very thriving, busy, full, exciting design studio where we've designed now health and wellness spaces all over the world. And it brings us a lot of joy and satisfaction. And we really hope that, our purpose of like elevating healthcare spaces is being realized.
Do you both still treat as physiotherapists as well?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
We
okay.
we are both in our worlds of treating. I work in sport medicine, so definitely a different environment in terms of just the physical spaces. And Meg is also practicing in her own personally designed studio.
Yeah, it's scaled back quite a bit. Physio practice for me is very, very, very small component of what I do because of Articulate and where it's grown to. But I think it's important for both of us to always have sort of fingers in the industry. I think it's what keeps us relevant and keeps us in the know about that clinical environment and the business behind it. So it's not something either of us are looking to give up, but definitely trying to run two businesses is a task in and of itself.
So I guess my next question, which isn't necessarily related to clinic design, but because you both have this background where you are a physiotherapist and now you took this personal interest in design and created that second business, is how did you cultivate that interest outside of physical therapist? I find that a lot of times when you're in that physical therapy, sport medicine world, is you get so hyper focused in your field and we don't necessarily look at we don't really have a lot of other interests that are outside of maybe your own training and outside the health and wellness space. So how did you cultivate an interest that seems very far removed from your professions?
Yeah, for me, I think all three of us have like a background as high level athletes. So I've never just been one thing or been into one thing. I think that that's just always been me. But I do distinctly remember when Articulate became this really feasible thing for me. And it was during COVID. As one did, I had a lot of time to kind of self reflect. And what I really felt was like that creative outlet was just not there for me. And I've always been a very creative person, as Meg had said. Both of us have done really big design projects personally. Um, and I've always just had a huge interest in creative arts in general. So during that time, I was reflecting on what kind of felt like it was missing in my life, and it was a creative outlet. And I think that just was in the background when Meg and I started having these deeper conversations about our industry and where we think our industry is, really behind.
Mm.
So I've always been, for me, I've always been like more than one thing.
Yeah.
But Articulate really came from an intention to cultivate some of those other things
Yeah.
outside of healthcare, for which was really halted at the time for me.
Right. So that you pushed pause. You're already this like multifaceted individual, as most of us really are. And then
Mm-hmm.
you took that time to actually cultivate more of the design, and those like additional interests.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Meg, what about for you? How did you cultivate that like that creativity outside of your normal profession?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I now since like kind of preach in this to everybody that I see, whether they want to hear it or not, I guess it's more unsolicited, that I think we're all multifaceted and that we should all, in a way, have different jobs. And as feasible as that may be. And that when you can kind of work those different sides of your brain, I think we're all a little bit more fulfilled. And maybe that's too big of a generalization, but Neena and I definitely feel that deeply. Of we can go into clinic and use our scientific brain and analytical brain and see patients and clients, and I can work on my business. And then there's this whole other side of creativity that each fuels the other, and I think we all have that in us. I really, truly do. And it's usually, and I'm sure you have this with your clients, Jody, if you take people on and they're like, okay, I need your help. This totally isn't my realm. And then you're halfway into a project and they're very much taking it on as like, this is, because it taps into this creative force within them of they've got ideas. And what about this? It's like you've harnessed something within people who think it's totally shut off to them.
Mm.
And I think that's what maybe the two of us have kind of just tapped into. And it feels really fulfilling at this juncture in our career.
I love that. So next question is why, and this is kind of moving away from maybe like the personal side of things, but is why is design important in healthcare? Like we've talked about it, healthcare feels like it's so far behind in terms of designing, things that flow and things that are empathetic and just places and spaces that actually feel like you could heal or and are inspiring. So tell us like why is design important in healthcare? Because clearly we've been ignoring it.
I think if we were to really sit back and reflect on it, I believe most people would say that design in healthcare is very important. It's just been an industry that's treated it more like a frill than a necessity. And there's many studies of illustrating that the design of a space, the feel of a space, the environment that a person is in can completely change their health outcomes. And so, why would we as practitioners not be tapping into that to really, complement the treatment that we're giving? And I think because it hasn't been done, people just tend to do the status quo, right?
Mhm.
The expectation historically hasn't been there, so I don't need to invest the money into this experience. But the market's changed and is continuing to change, and the 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 market's demanding experience, right? People are putting their money and their time into experiences. And I think that's kind of the crux of where our business became very successful, in that clinic owners, entrepreneurs, people in the health space are willing to look at design as an essential investment in their business.
Nina, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's so many different reasons why design is important. If we're looking at it from a really functional and bottom line perspective, having a solid plan going into a physical space saves you money and makes you money, right? Being really intentional about how the spaces are laid out, how it flows, all of that, from a very utilitarian perspective is immensely important to the success of a wellness space. I think Meg touched on this idea of biophilic design, where a lot of health spaces in the US, they are starting to see that there's actual health parameters like hormonal, blood pressure, all of these things can actually be influenced by physical space design elements. So that's a whole other thing. I think the other thing that's really important is brand experience, right? We're all of these businesses are developing these amazing brands, and I think your space is creating this huge attraction, right? We're seeing the brand for the first time digitally, and we're starting to interact with it, and then the physical design is just the continuation of that experience, and that's what sets everybody apart. And we're in a very visual space now on social media and online, and the the images that we're seeing of these physical spaces is, in truth, a huge part of how people are making the decision of where to go. Mm-hmm. It's not just the practitioners and their experience, but really what pulls them in is that brand experience digitally and then physically.
So, I mean, you actually brought up a really great point, Nina, is what role does brand play in the physical space when you are creating these clinic spaces and you're creating these wellness spaces? Is
I think for us, if you look at our design portfolio, the spaces are all completely different, and we've worked together and we send you some very different things. And the reason being is the brand is really the soul of the space. We're really, our passion is taking that brand and that clinical philosophy and the overall experience and really creating, translating that, or like articulating that into the physical experience. So without a solid brand idea and concept, without a brand that's very well developed, the design will likely fall flat. I truly think it's the soul of the space.
All right, well, Meg, then this question's for you. And that's, how do you bring the brand into someone's space? So we've talked about like what role does it play, but how do you actually bring someone's brand? How do you bring that soul, and that like those big abstract ideas? How do you bring that into the physical space and create something tangible?
It starts with our process, and we approach our design process very similarly to how we approach our process as physiotherapists. So we've all learned and honed these skills of when you ask the right questions, the answers revealed to you. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of our clients, and rightfully so, they're very busy either starting up their business or running their business, that often not a lot of thought is put into their whole brand identity and what they want from their business and where it's going. And so we pride ourselves on having a very thorough intake form, much the same we would give to our patients or our clients. And the idea is that we're really asking questions that are quite pointed at getting to the root of what they maybe have a hard time articulating or bringing out. And that is, what do they want the client or the clinician to feel when they're in the space? And that comes out in questions like, what kind of music do you like to play? What kind of colors are you attracted to? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? It spans the breadth of, business questions to aesthetic questions to brand questions. But really what we're trying to tease out is a vibe, for lack of a better word. And that, I think we've honed quite well, that we can get a sense for what the energy, the vibe, the feel that people are trying to create for their customer base and for their staff. And then we put together a high level concept. And that's kind of the main checkpoint. We have people do the form, and then our next touch point with them is to show them this high level concept. And that's really how we all know we're on the right page. And that visual concept of sort of this is how we see the space coming together in a very loose way is usually what they say of like, you've put onto paper, you've put into visuals what I've had a hard time kind of expressing. And to me, that's how then this soul, the brand, this experience starts to take shape, because we then use that as a jumping off point to get into kind of our nitty gritty design. So that process that we've really evolved over the last 4 years, I think has really helped us go on that journey with our clients.
I think it's so interesting you bring up, as a therapist, you're taught how to ask the right questions or figure out what questions you need to ask in order to get the right answers. And that's one of the cool things that I think I found for myself as well, is that experience, my past experience as a therapist really helps us as designers get to the heart of like those big abstract things that clinicians just don't know how to articulate, and don't know how to like get out and get onto paper. So very fun to hear that you have like a very similar process in terms of ask the right questions and get the right answers.
It's no surprise that's the name of it's why we're called Articulate,
Totally.
right? It's like taking this very abstract idea, what people historically or typically have a hard time getting out, and we're here to articulate that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how many times that comes up in conversation. So what are some of the senses that you consider in space design? So you talked about like, what kind of music do you want to have playing in your clinic? I think we think of brand as being this thing where it's just visuals, but it's so much more than that. It can be so many different senses. So what kind of senses do you consider, and do you even talk about when you're designing wellness spaces?
I feel like we talk about most of the senses, maybe just not like taste. But aside from that, we have even talked about like different scents in a space and what that can evoke in someone walking through the door. Light is just integral, we think, to, I mean, we can think about that even from a wellness perspective, what different forms and different intensities of lights can do for the nervous system, as well as, using color theory and thinking about how various colors or intensities of colors can also affect the nervous system. So really, we're truly thinking of all of those different senses, and how to kind of put them together in a way that reflects this overall vibe that our owners are trying to kind of create in a space. Um, and that is just really getting to know their personality as well. But I think, yeah, all of the senses, maybe just not taste.
Yeah.
Well, taste maybe in the sense of like, we're talking often about creating like, refreshments when people come in the door.
That's
like maybe
true.
You have lemon water, and the only time that
That's so
client has lemon water is in your clinic, and it's like they look forward to that touch point, or a really nice coffee because that's your specialty. And so I think that's in there. One clinic I just visited that we were doing our last sort of visit with, you actually worked on this one, Align, with us, Jody.
Yeah.
She had diffused lemongrass, and it was like very subtle. So anyone with like a scent issue likely wouldn't be triggered.
Mhm.
But it like lingered on me, like when I left and I changed my clothes that night. And it's of course this like visceral reminder. Like as soon as I smelt it, I thought of that space, and I've smelt it since elsewhere, but it immediately triggers this memory of walking in the door and how it was such a nice, fresh smell. And those things are very powerful, and they're just so additive to the experience. They're easy, low-hanging fruit, but incredibly powerful.
That just seems like such a no-brainer to include something. I mean, again, we have to be very sensitive to allergies and things like that. But what a long-lasting effect every time you smell something that you think of that brand. Like that would be incredible. Or you think of that clinic and your experience there. What should they consider when choosing their space?
I think it starts with understanding their brand, right? And having a good, no matter what you're doing, what the space is going to look like. I think that's huge. I think having a solid business plan, like as Meg was saying, like shockingly, a lot of owners we've worked with are just like, shooting from the hip. They're like committing to like starting this new practice, but there isn't truly a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. I think it's important to plan for growth and assume you're going to grow. This is a hugely growing industry, right? Like no one is not, no one lacks potential in growth. So I think having a plan for growth, having a really intentional business plan, understanding the kinds of people you want to hire, understanding the kinds of people you want to be your clients. I think all of that is the legwork that we need our clients to do. And then it's really developing a very strong design plan and, a must-have list when speccing out different spaces, and understanding that we've come into the process too late, when clients have engaged with us, when they've already picked out spaces, there's a lot of site conditions that they would never have thought about that drastically affect the design and the amount of investment they have to put in to create the space that aligns with their plan. So I think the biggest things is that the client's understanding, or the owner's understanding their business really, really well and what they need to succeed and grow, but then engaging and planning in the design to an extent before they've even picked a place, right? So that they can know what kind of place they need and what constraints they have to consider.
I'm going to kind of like repeat some of those things back to you, is that basically it would benefit owners if they actually were engaging with a design team. Obviously, once their brand is sorted and they have this like solid understanding of their business, but before they actually choose a space, because there's a lot of guidance and a lot of considerations or questions they may not have asked before even choosing their space, that they could actually they could benefit from your service.
100%. We recently had a client who, leased a beautiful space, and it's amazing. But what we came to realize was they're going to have Pilates as a service, and there's going to be clients standing on the reformer. And so then all of the bulkheads and the things on the ceiling start to become a factor, right? And so things like that, understanding kind of site conditions, we ask questions. That's part of our skill set, is just asking questions that people may not consider before they've put the money down, so that they're saving the money up front and not having to correct and make huge investments to, navigate that issue down the line.
Are there some key things that, some key questions you'd ask before choosing a space? Like certain ones that you're like, you should just make sure you know the answer to this.
The thing people really need to know is their business. So one of our services is we do a clinic consultation. So let's say you're wanting to open up a practice and you've looked at a few different commercial spaces and you're down to I like these 2 spaces. They're relatively the same size. Let's use for this example, they're both 2,000 square feet. And there's kind of equal trade-offs in terms of location or what they think. Mm-hmm. What we'll do often is get to the heart of how many treatment rooms do you need to make the income you're looking for? How many different professions do you need in this space? How many people need to work in this space at one time? Knowing the bottom line of their business model. Because what often will happen is we can have 2 spaces that are both 2,000 square feet. So you're paying, let's say, the same lease, but one can fit 7 treatment rooms and one can fit 5 because of the way it's configured. Well, that's very dramatically different in the income generation potential. So those kinds of things are really important. Or one may need plumbing, relocated, and that's going to be $50,000 to do, to Neena's point. So when we start to get more into the nitty gritty, and the more somebody understands their business and has worked through kind of those scenarios, the better off that they're going to be. I mean, in terms of the branding, often that we can do that in tandem as they start going down the line. And we've done that with you as we're doing the design and the branding, that can be collaborative, but people need to know their business plan, their numbers, what is going to be the trajectory so that we can then plan and make sure that they're going to be successful.
The next thing I'd like to talk about is just like, are there common mistakes you see people make in regards to starting a new clinic or expanding their clinic? Like, what things do people consistently do that you're like, we could do this better, or we could save you money, save you time in the long run?
I think we both have so many opinions on this, and like we're
How do
very
we not
aligned.
alienate the whole audience? Yeah. Okay.
I think
What if we gave you each two?
sure. I think for me, one is like not having a plan and thinking of design as a frill, which is unfortunately what happens more often than not. And we're trying to change that. But thinking of it like, oh, I just need it to look nice. So it's like I need the treatment rooms, I need the reception, like I need all the equipment, and then I'll figure out how to make it look good. And I just need a logo on the back wall behind my desk, and then I will just have a plant and I'll go to IKEA and I'll find some stuff. And so not really being intentional, not utilizing the physical space as like an element of treatment or as part of the overall service you're offering. I think that is just a huge error that people make, just thinking of design as this like this frill, this thing I have to do at the end. I think that is like just a huge flaw or error that people make. I think also not looking at design, this kind of goes hand in hand, not looking at design as an integral part of the investment that they're making. So, just as much as you're budgeting for your equipment and your staffing and your lease, the design needs to be like one of those pillars of investment right up from the start, because you really can't do much without a solid physical space design, right? That's really how you're gaining income. Like obviously we're very passionate about this, but I feel really strongly about that. Just this not thinking of it as like an integral investment, I think is where people end up with a really disjointed looking and feeling space.
Sounds like it's a missed opportunity if you don't look at design as part of your brand and part of the experience and almost part of how.
Yeah, I think I could relate it maybe a bit, or you might relate to this too, Jody, is I think for a lot of people, it's obviously very overwhelming to start a business. And sometimes it's just like, I just need to get the doors open and get working. And so there's almost this very superficial approach to the business. And it's kind of just that the design's superficial, the brand is superficial. Everything about it is like, what's the bare minimum to open doors? And that's fine. I understand that. We understand that. That's many of our clients where 5 years down the road, they're like, okay, this space, this brand does not at all represent what I am putting out there as a practitioner. But it's a much more challenging, much more expensive process to do it at that point. And for some, that's the reality. That's the only time they can do it, and better late than never. But Neena has this saying, buy once, cry once. Like, do this once, do it well, and it pays off exponentially than putting yourself in a box where if you've built out a bricks and mortar space, we're needing to come in and design it, but we're very limited because we're not going to tear down walls. And, we're very constrained with how creative we can be in this space. And I'm sure you have it when people have developed a brand, and by developing a brand, they've like made a logo and picked a couple of colors, and they don't want to abandon that altogether. But it really confines how creative you can be in expanding this. And so we really encourage people, if you are starting a business or thinking about it, to, get the investment, get the backing to do it well the first time, because I guarantee you will be already ready to grow to that second location if that's what you're looking to do within 3 or 4 years when you've done it well. Like we've seen it time and time and time again with our clients, versus trying to retrofit a space, retrofit a brand. It's a big headache and a big disruption to the business.
On that note, because we are kind of talking about like sometimes in business we just like you got to bootstrap it at the beginning. You just need to do what you need to do to get your doors open. I actually really like the rebrand process because they've gone from DIY, or maybe even just like they they had an order taker designer that created this logo for them and they didn't ask any questions and it was just based on personal preferences. I actually love it when those business owners come back to me in 5 years and are like, okay, now we've had some time to get our feet on the ground. We know what we want to accomplish moving forward. Their vision is so much bigger. It's so much stronger. Um, how do you guys work with a client that's maybe in that space where they're like, okay, we did have to bootstrap it at the beginning, but now we're ready to rebrand. We do have a clinic space. Maybe they're looking to expand the current one, or maybe they're looking for an entirely new clinic space. You know, what are some of the most important considerations for those kinds of clinics or those kinds of owners?
Being brave to do something outside of the box that they've operated in. And they're clearly ready, right? They want more, they want to create a better experience. But I think then also shedding some of the older, maybe less efficient ways of doing things. And I think a big thing that we pride ourselves on is like, what are these welcome and reception spaces looking like and feeling like, and how are they functioning? And creating something really unique that may not be just the typical reception desk with someone and a computer and a payment system, and chairs lined up. I think that is something that we love exploring with these kind of clients who are looking to kind of create something really amazing for themselves and for their clients. I think that's a big part of it, is just having them let go of some of that. Like maybe we go paperless, right? Maybe we explore a lot of these new technologies out there and EMR software and different tech options that allow the physical space to be freed up for some really cool experiences.
Yeah, Meg, anything to add to that one?
No, I mean, again, like I get it. I started my business very basic. I made a logo and I don't even think Canva was around then, and sort of threw things together. And I get it. Sometimes you need to do that to discover who you are. But to Nina's point, I think it's then being brave enough to say, okay, like we can embrace change and we can do better now. And really that self-evaluation of is my social media, my website, my space, is all of that aligned with, you know, who I am as a practitioner or who we are as a business, and that, you know, doing that audit every once and again. And I think for the clients that we take on, they feel like they've moved completely away from that. And that's a great time to really improve and enhance what you've put together.
Yeah, and lean into the design portion of it when you're ready to expand and be bold and be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll say about that particular population of our clients who have been practicing for a number of years and are looking to grow, one thing I love about that population is like they know what things cost. And so the investment side of things isn't so daunting to them, isn't off-putting. They understand that their investment will have a really good return. Whereas sometimes with people who are starting this for the very first time, they're really nervous about the expenses because they haven't grown a business yet. So I think that is one like kind of refreshing aspect of these particular clients who are kind of have succeeded, and now they want a space that just feels amazing and aligned with their brand and philosophy and ethos.
Where would you spend most of your time? Like if you did have to be kind of like budget wise and friendly starting up your own clinic, where would you spend a lot of time and focus designing your space? Like, are there certain rooms in a space that you would focus on?
For sure, in your common spaces, we would invest more, in particularly your reception. We kind of treat it like your first impression.
Yeah.
And that really should be the most in line with your digital space. So what does your, if your digital space is something you're proud of, then how is that pulling into, so when somebody walks in the door, you shouldn't even need the name of your space there. It's immediately recognizable. And actually we do that most places. We say, don't even, maybe you have your logo mark, but you don't even need to tell people because they just know when they walk in the door. Yeah. And that's a strong brand, right? And so that's where we tell people to spend a bit more money to do like custom signage, or maybe it's a custom desk or piece of furniture where it really adds some unique value. But then treatment rooms are great to be very utilitarian, like have it be minimal, have it be organized, have it be clean, but you can do that on a shoestring budget and it look really nice as long as it's organized and well intended in its design. And so, we don't like to just spend money for the sake of it. We're clinicians, we know what all of us make, and it's not it's not big bucks, right? Like we get it that these are business owners who are really looking to make their money go as far as possible. And we love that about design is that as long as it's well intentioned, it can be amazing at many different budgets.
Well, I think that's all we really have time for today. I'm sure we could talk about design for many, many more minutes. But my last question to you guys is, how do people connect with you outside of this episode? Where can they find you online, or how can they connect with you?
So we have a website, articulatedesignco.com, and we are on Instagram at Articulate Design Co. Those are the best ways to reach us. You can fill out an intake form on our website, and we can set up a discovery call to have a conversation and talk a little bit more about our services.
Instagram feed is beautiful. So I feel like I get lots of value just from being on your Instagram feed about, like posts about lighting, like how you can bring better lighting into your rooms, how you can, bring seasonal decor into your clinic spaces. Like there's just so many practical tips that you guys have about just designing spaces. So I highly recommend following these two on Instagram if you have any interest in design and are a business owner. And so finally, I just want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you both, Meg and Neena, for being on the show. And I'm sure we will have many more conversations.
Thanks, Jody. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having us.